This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Natalie Edwards. Tonight's top stories. Japan's outgoing Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba in South Korea for a summit with President Myung, aiming to firm up ties before his exit. On the table, U.S. trade tariffs and the nuclear threat from North Korea. And that nuclear program is something Pyongyang is not planning to give up on. The North tells the UN General Assembly that its nuclear weapons are vital to keeping a balance of power with the South. Meantime, Beijing's top U.S. envoy casts China as a champion of globalization, taking aim at Washington for closing doors with tariffs and tighter visa rules under President Donald Trump. And China announces its support for any plan that eases tensions between Israel and Hamas after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accepts President Trump's proposal to end the war in Gaza. And in business, Chinese factory activity contracts for a sixth straight month in September, marking the longest continuous decline in 6 years. Also the bulletin, China's Zijin Gold shines bright in its Hong Kong trading debut, with shares ending the day up nearly 70%. That's after raising more than $3 billion in one of the world's biggest IPOs this year. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is on his swan song visit to South Korea, where he has met President Myung in the coastal city of Busan. The leaders are hoping to further shore up ties on security and the economy. It's their third meeting since Mr. Lee took office 3 months ago. Well, earlier today, Mr. Ishiba visited the grave of a South Korean student, widely remembered as a symbol of bilateral ties. Lee So-hyun died in 2001 in Tokyo while attempting to rescue a Japanese man who had fallen onto train tracks. The two-day visit will likely be Mr. Ishiba's last foreign trip as Prime Minister. He will be stepping down when his ruling Liberal Democratic Party elects a new leader later this week. And our CNA senior correspondent Lim Yeon-suk joins us live now from Seoul. Yeon-suk, first up, what are some of the latest lines out of that summit?
Well, yes, the two leaders met in Busan for their summit, with President Myung stressing the closeness of the two countries in his opening remarks, and not just because they're very close as neighbors, but also their culture, economy, and security. And in fact, to stress how close they were, he was joking with Prime Minister Ishiba about how it took them about the same time or so for him to travel from Seoul to Busan, and for Prime Minister Ishiba from Tokyo to Busan. Now, meanwhile, Prime Minister Ishiba called for stronger cooperation on shared challenges like the aging populations, energy and food security. Now, the two leaders also said that Tuesday summit meeting shows how shuttle diplomacy between South Korea and Japan is firmly back on track. Now, according to a press release by the presidential office, the two leaders agreed to set up this regular working group to deal with social problems that the two countries face. Now, these are everyday issues like low birth rates, aging populations, farming, disaster prevention, and even suicide prevention, as the two countries have some of the highest suicide rates in the developed world, though South Korea is usually higher than Japan. Now, this idea behind the working group is that the ministers in charge on both sides are going to be meeting often, and they'll be sharing what's worked in their countries and even bring in outside experts if needed. Now, the idea is that they will be taking back home some of the best ideas and using them in their own policies. And to make sure that everything is on track, the two leaders agreed that the foreign ministries of both countries will be doing the checks, making sure that different groups are moving forward. Now, this, in the long run, the two countries are hoping that they can tackle these social problems together. And this is something that the two leaders have agreed to set up when they last met in Tokyo. And today, they agreed on the details on how this would be going to operation.
Well, it's interesting that Japan and South Korea, we've seen a series of diplomatic breakthroughs in recent months. So Yoon, what exactly is pushing this, and what sort of impact will Tokyo's leadership change have on the relations?
Well, yes, we have been seeing this diplomatic breakthroughs between Seoul and Tokyo in the past 2 years, even when Lee Jae-myung's predecessor, Yoon Suk-yeol, was in office. And what's pushing both countries could be, experts saying could be some of the shared pressure and this political will of the leaders from both countries. Here in South Korea, we have President Lee Jae-myung, who came into office just months after the martial law crisis and the impeachment of former President Yoon Suk-yeol. And experts believe that he needed to somehow quickly show stability and credibility to the outside world. And that meant not just the United States, its closest ally, but also its neighbor, Tokyo. Now, on the Japanese side, experts think it's possible that Prime Minister Ishiba wanted to show leadership by engaging more with South Korea. And also, the two countries face very similar domestic challenges, the rapidly aging population, the falling birth rates, and this regional decline. And so many experts here are saying that it is good that they are working on these common social issues and really trying to stay away from historical issues that have strained bilateral ties for decades. Also, you have security issues, North Korea's nuclear threat. You have China, Russia, the trade tensions with the United States. And so experts think for both South Korea and Japan, there is this strong incentive to keep this shuttle diplomacy going. And experts, also saying that though Prime Minister Ishiba is stepping down, which South Korea is watching very closely, they do think that the next Japanese leader will want to continue this shuttle diplomacy. And, though that really depends on who takes over, because if the new prime minister reopens these old wounds on history, Yasukuni Shrine or textbooks, then, it's possible that the two countries will have to go back to the old ways when there was no shuttle diplomacy or meetings between the leaders of the two countries. But many experts here think that most candidates haven't signaled major changes, so the expectation is that they will continue this. And, because South Korea knows from past experiences how quickly ties between the two countries can shift, and which is why many experts saying that President Lee Jae-myung is trying to lock in some of these agreements at the ministry-to-ministry level so that they can survive any leadership change in Japan.
Okay, thanks so very much for that report. CNA's senior correspondent Lim Yun-suk in Seoul. And for more insights into the ties between the two countries, we will be speaking with Grant Newsham a little later this hour. He's a senior research fellow at the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies. Now, the Chinese ambassador to the U.S. says that Beijing is committed to openness, even as other nations are closing doors. CF Feng made those remarks at an embassy event celebrating China's 76th founding anniversary. The ambassador highlighted that China has maintained inclusiveness and win-win cooperation despite rising protectionism. His comments come amid an extended tariff truce between the U.S. and China, which temporarily suspended triple-digit duties on each other's goods. Mr. Xie also hinted at easier visa applications coming soon for American visitors. Leaders of both countries are expected to meet in about a month's time on the sidelines of the APEC summit in South Korea. But ahead of that, Washington expanded its export blacklist to automatically apply restrictions placed on a company to its majority-owned divisions as well. The U.S. Commerce Department says it's meant to close a loophole in export controls. While it does not single out China, the move is expected to impact divisions of major Chinese chip makers, including Huawei and SMIC. Beijing has called the decision, quote, extremely egregious. U.S. President Donald Trump has also expanded his tariff assault. He announced additional levies on imported timber and lumber and more tariffs on kitchen cabinets, bathroom vanities, and upholstered furniture. Those tariffs will take effect in 2 weeks. China is the world's largest furniture maker, with its output accounting for more than a quarter of the global share. South Korea also faces headwinds in trade talks with the U.S. National Security Advisor Wee Sang-lak says that he is not optimistic about a currency swap arrangement. Well, the swap is a safeguard for Seoul's $350 billion investment pledge to Washington. Mr. Wee says that the two countries are struggling to narrow their differences over lowering tariffs on Korean goods from 25% to 15%. He added that while a swap was among the necessary conditions, other requirements must also be met for a deal to be finalized. But Mr. Wee voiced hopes that Seoul and Washington could eventually reach a compromise. The South Korean advisor said yesterday that his country is unable to fulfill its pledge to the U.S. in cash that Donald Trump had announced would be made up front. Mr. Wee said that it was unclear whether the American leader's statement took Seoul's stance into account. Meanwhile, South Korea's finance ministry says the Asian Development Bank kept its 2025 growth outlook for the country's economy steady at 0.8%. The bank projected the growth in July down 0.7 percentage point from its forecast in April. China is eyeing a major boost to sluggish consumer spending. Hundreds of millions of people expected to travel both domestically and abroad for the 8-day-long Golden Week holiday, which combines its National Day with the Mid-Autumn Festival. But ahead of that, the country today turned its focus to its national heroes on Martyrs' Day. Leaders today paid tribute to the fallen in the capital, Beijing, taking turns to place flower baskets in front of the monument to the people's heroes at Tiananmen Square. President Xi Jinping led the commemorations, which included other senior Communist Party of China officials, such as Premier Li Qiang. And in Hong Kong, 2 Chinese Navy ships arrived at the financial hub ahead of the National Day celebrations tomorrow. The first to arrive was the amphibious landing platform called Yimengshan, followed by the training ship Qijiguang, the names of both ships related to historical battles. The ships will both be open to the public as part of celebrations, and it comes 3 months after China's first independently designed aircraft carrier, the Shandong, made a port call. And for more on the highly anticipated holidays, we're joined now by CNA senior correspondent Tan Yu-Guan, live from Shanghai. So, Yu-Guan, what can we expect from Golden Week?
Well, here in Shanghai, you already get a sense of what to expect. You see the holiday mood is taking hold even before the official start. Traffic on city roads started clogging up this afternoon, well ahead of office closing time, with some companies allowing their staff to leave early. Now, in some offices, you could literally see bags lined up and ready. I saw one social media post where there was a photo of a lobby with piles of suitcases and luggages all waiting as the workers are all set to sprint for the airport, the train station, or the highway the moment their day is done. There's a real sense of anticipation in the air because many Chinese workers this is one big break they can count on all year, at least one of 2. Unlike in many other countries, annual leave here can be quite limited and tightly controlled. In some traditional firms or state-run organizations, it's not unusual for staff to be discouraged from taking leave outside of official holidays, and newer employees often don't get any annual leave until they have completed a full year of service. And even then, it may be just 7 days. So Golden Week is hugely significant. It's not just time off, it's often the only chance people have to travel with family or friends. So it's not surprising many who can are trying to beat the crowd and heading out well before the official break begins. We already see reports of jams on Shanghai's main exits earlier than the official holiday tomorrow. The scramble is really quite a sign of how competitive and crowded life in China can be. Many here describe that phenomenon as neighbours or involution. It's this cycle where people try to push harder and harder and try to get ahead, and in the end, everyone is stuck in the same jam, literally in this case. You see it at work, you see it in education, you see it during Golden Week. Now, it plays out on the roads, in the train stations, in the airport. Everyone is just trying to outsmart the system. And, people are desperate to make the most out of this short holiday and get whatever it takes to get a head start. So for others, however, the crowds can be a huge turn-off. Oteli?
So, Yu-Guan, I guess, these people will be looking to spend, to buy things and all of that. So no surprise in that China's eyeing a boost in domestic consumption during this long holiday stretch. Tell us more about that.
Yes, this rush to get moving obviously means huge numbers are involved. Authorities expect 2.4 billion journeys in just 8 days. Nearly 80% of those will be by car. Highways are already choked, as I mentioned earlier. And And to make things worse, tolls have been waived for smaller vehicles, which is why we're also seeing a spike in car rentals and early departures. Now, the biggest train station in Shanghai, Hongqiao Station, has projected 250,000 people passing through just today alone. Now, Beijing's hoping all this movement translates into stronger spending. So all these long queues at ticket counters, jammed highways, packed tourist spots are not just about leisure, they're also an important signal if people open their wallets during Golden Week. It could give consumer confidence and the broader economy a much-needed boost. In 2024, Golden Week last year, domestic tourists spent about 700 billion yuan, or about $100 billion. To give a sense of the scale of things, that's about 5 to 7 times higher than the normal weeks. Travel platforms regularly report booking volumes that are 2 to 3 times higher than normal weeks. Retail and restaurants, depending on where they are, can easily expect business to double. Observers and economists will definitely be looking out for the tabulated numbers at the end of this Golden Week to get a sense of consumer confidence in China. Oteli?
And just very quickly before I let you go, what will you be doing during Golden Week? Are you going to be contributing to the economy?
Well, I'm afraid I'll be heading back to Singapore for a few days before our corporate retreat. All
right, see you then. Thanks so very much, CNA's senior correspondent Han Yung-wan, live from Shanghai. Well, time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Japan's beer giant Asahi struggling to deal with a cyber attack that's crippled its production. Plus, South Korea's used car market sees a windfall amid President Trump's steep auto tariffs. Hello again. You are just in time for some business news with Roland Lim. So, Roland, crossing the expansion mark appears to be a tall order for Chinese factories these days, it appears.
Right you are, Oteli. Right, the measuring gauge of manufacturing activity been in contraction mode for months, despite policymakers' numerous efforts to revive the economic momentum. China's manufacturing activity is suffering its longest decline in 6 years, shrinking for a 6th straight month in September. Now, the slump suggesting producers are waiting for further stimulus to boost domestic demand, as well as for clarity on a U.S. trade deal. Factory activity remained in contraction territory this month, though it was the strongest reading since March. The prolonged slump underlines the twin pressures on China's economy. Domestic demand has failed to mount a durable recovery in the years since the pandemic, while President Trump's tariffs have squeezed Chinese factories as well as overseas firms that buy components. At the same time, non-manufacturing PMI grew in the month of September, but at a slightly slower pace, signaling modest expansion in services activity. And markets remaining steady following the data, with attention focused on policymakers' plans for near-term stimulus and a meeting of the ruling Communist Party in October. Shanghai Composite ending day 0.5% higher, Shenzhen up by 0.35%. The Hang Seng Index did better, nearly 0.9% up. Paul Gambles from MBMG Group explains what the latest data out of China tells us about the state of the economy and the possibility of more stimulus measures.
If anything, they're going to be fairly happy with the direction of travel. But they're probably more concerned about services, which is now still hovering around contraction versus expansion. It's not really pushing on from there. But I think, with manufacturing, they're probably fairly happy with the direction of travel. Sure, they'd love to have had a 50 number to announce this month, but if they announce it next month, I think that's okay. And, they're very responsive to the data that they get, which they see, before we do. So I think the Chinese government probably, and Chinese policymakers probably have the economic situation there under control. They have it covered, which I think is directly opposite to what's happening in the States. We definitely need, fiscal impetus to keep the wheels spinning. And in China, we're getting that. In the States, it's not the same case. So I'm not worried about China. I'm more worried about the West, to be honest.
Japanese beer and beverage giant Asahi says it has not been able to resume production at domestic factories a day after a cyber attack. Now, it is unclear when operations will resume. The company has 30 plants in Japan making beer, beverage, and food products, but it is still investigating whether all of them have stopped production. Asahi last night said that its group companies in Japan suspended operations, including order processing, shipping, and call center functions due to a cyber attack caused system outage. But it didn't confirm if personal information of customers was compromised. Asahi apologized to its customers and business partners in a statement. About half of Asahi Group's holdings sales takes place in Japan. And in a report last year, Asahi listed a cyber attack as among the main risks it faced in the medium to short term. Now, it assessed that such an attack could potentially lead to an interruption of its business, create cash flow issues, and damage its brand name. While South Korea's automakers fret over U.S. auto tariffs, the country's used car export market is experiencing a boom.
미국의 그 관세 인상에 따른 자동차 출시장의 어떤 변화는 중고차 시장 출시장으로 볼 때는 나쁘지 않은 것 같아요. 어차피 그 중고차 신차에 대한 관세가 올라갈 것 같으면 장기적으로 후행적으로 그 자동차 가격이 올라가거든요. 그렇다면은 전 세계적으로 자동차 가격이 오른다. 그럴 경우에는 중고차 가격도 후행적으로 따라갈 가능성이 있거든요. 그렇다면 수입차들 볼 때는 옛날보다 유리한 조건으로 팔 수 있다 보니까 나쁘지 않습니다.
South Korea exported nearly $4 billion worth of second-hand cars in the first half of the year. That's 72% higher on year. Experts say the trend is likely to continue with strong demand from Russia and the Middle East, particularly Syria, as it recovers from a decade-long civil war. Now, Seoul restricted exports of larger cars to Russia last year, but Russian buyers circumvent them through Central Asian countries as mediaries. Shares of China's Zijin Gold International soared by more than 60% after they began trading in Hong Kong today. The company is the latest to launch its IPO in the financial hub, which is cementing its position as the world's top fundraising location. And analysts believe the city will only become more appealing for Chinese companies seeking dual listings. CNA's senior correspondent Mei Wong reports.
Hong Kong's glittering for China's Zijin Gold International with its debut listing on Tuesday.
我们在此相继，共同见证紫金黄金国际上市的重要里程碑时刻。紫金黄金国际是紫金矿业海外黄金资产的核心平台。今天，我们再次鸣锣，预示着一个耀眼的黄金时代的重新开启。
The company, the gold mining arm of Zijin Mining Group, raised $3.2 billion, making it the second largest IPO for Hong Kong this year. First was leading battery maker CATL with a $5.3 billion listing in May. This makes it the world's largest IPO since 2023. Aside from the traditional retail and healthcare IPOs, electric vehicle manufacturers have also looked to Hong Kong to raise funds for expansion. Just last week, EV maker Chery Automobile launched its $1.2 billion IPO in Hong Kong. It sells itself as the first Chinese automaker to export more than 5 million vehicles in a domestic market where more established names are being squeezed for market share by new players.
Because of this very tough competition, a lot of these firms, they will want an offshore platform to raise funds and expand overseas. So to me, this will be the biggest driver for all these companies, not only within the EV manufacturing sector, but also the related supply chain, such as the battery, the other technology behind producing this sort of EVs, and also the upstream material as well.
Economic conditions in Hong Kong are favorable for companies to list in the city. And with the ongoing U.S. tariff cloud still hanging overhead, analysts expect Chinese corporations in particular to want to further diversify their operations.
they have changed their model not only through exporting from China, but also investing locally to build the supply chain in order to capture the market share. So with that in mind, then I think Hong Kong will be definitely one of the top locations that they would think of, because in the past, maybe the US market would give a better valuation, but they're still concerned on whether they are that welcoming to the Chinese firms with that regard. So I guess companies will always have a plan B. So even though some firms may decide that, okay, US is still the best location, but they will also have their exposure towards Hong Kong through listing here. So that I think a dual listing model seems to me is the best way for all these firms to diversify right now.
Leading Chinese companies have benefited from support from the China Securities Regulatory Commission to list in Hong Kong. And though Hong Kong continues to see a burgeoning IPO market, observers caution investors about being selective and discerning over the quality of corporations. This especially going into next year, where geopolitical risks are expected to increase. Myung, CNA, Hong Kong.
And that's your business update. Oteli.
Thanks so very much, Roland. All right, we're going to go for another break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung hosts outgoing Japanese leader Shigeru Ishiba, with shared challenges topping the agenda. More insights when we speak with an expert in just a moment. Hello there, this is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Beijing's top U.S. envoy casts China as a champion of globalization, taking aim at Washington for closing its doors with tariffs and tighter visa rules under President Donald Trump. North Korea at the UN General Assembly insists it will never give up its nuclear program, saying its weapons are vital to keep a balance of power with its southern neighbor. And Japan's outgoing Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba in South Korea for a summit with President Lee Jae-myung to firm up ties before his exit. Both leaders agree to boost cooperation on shared challenges, including the Trump tariffs and North Korea's nuclear ambitions. And for more, Grant Newsham, Senior Research Fellow at the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies, joins us live now from Tokyo. Well, Grant, thanks for taking time out to do this. First up, let's just talk about this summit timing. It is the second summit since August, coming as Japan faces this leadership shuffle and South Korea, grappling with political trouble. So how significant is this timing for both governments?
Oh, there's a certain significance, particularly from the Japanese side. It shows that they're still engaged in South Korea relations, foreign relations, despite the political upheaval that's going on in Japan, and the fact that Ishiba will be gone very shortly, within a week. It's in some ways it's a way to have him go out on a high note, because he has been a rather unimpressive prime minister. So it works well, and it just shows that regardless of who's in charge in Japan, that the foreign relations still continue.
And Grant, and of course, timing links directly to leadership. When Prime Minister Ishiba stepping down, how much continuity can we expect in this Japan-South Korea ties? And I guess who is going to be impressive enough to be the next LDP leader to take on the job?
I think it's up to South Korea, ultimately. The Japanese are willing to cooperate as much as South Korea wants to. It's always been that way for a long time. In terms of who is the best candidate to handle these relations, I think Sanai Takaichi is probably the one with the best understanding of foreign affairs, regional affairs, economics, security, a number of matters. And she's mastered the policy issues. She's done her homework, she studies, she listens. Whereas the other main contender, Koizumi, he is famous for being famous. He comes from a famous political family. But when he speaks, it doesn't suggest a deep understanding, say, of the political issues. Takaichi certainly recognizes the importance of the Japan-South Korea relationship. And it's not as if Koizumi would ignore it, but he just doesn't quite have the gravitas. He may be more popular with some of the old guys who run the LDP and some other people, partly because he'd be a little bit more malleable and listen to what they say. But Japan understands the importance of the South Korea relationship, has tried to make it better for a long time, And it's really a question of whether South Korea will reciprocate. There's some question as to whether or not the current president of South Korea, Lee Jae-myung, is actually all that committed to improving the relationship with Japan, or whether this is just an opportunistic sort of act on his part.
So, well, polls are showing that Sanae is at the top, but I guess we'll know next week for sure what the outcome is. I want to move on and talk about North Korea, because that is high on the agenda at this summit. Tell us how aligned are Tokyo and Seoul in their security strategies, and where do their differences still lie?
Well, you'd think that they would be aligned because they're both well within range of North Korean weaponry. In terms of security strategy, that's a tough one to answer. The Americans have managed to get the South Koreans to cooperate more with the Japanese, to the point that they're doing trilateral air, naval, cyber, missile defense exercises between the Japanese, the South Koreans, and with the Americans involved in here. So it's the trilateral relationship where we're seeing the progress, and that's because of the Americans really pushing, and the Japanese willingness to join in, and South Korea, particularly under the previous Yoon administration, they're the ones who really repaired the relationship with Japan. The leftists, as represented by the current president, Lee Jae-myung, they have always used Japan as really a political weapon to characterize their opponents as lackeys of the Japanese, and they've been venomous, vicious. But now that Lee has taken the presidency, he's now acting like a pragmatist. Whether or not he really is hard to say. In terms of North Korea, the Japanese are scared to death of North Korea and have been since the 90s. This current regime administration in South Korea, just by its own language and what the key members of it, including Lee, have said and what they do towards North Korea, there's some real doubt as to how strict or how tough they're going to be on North Korea, and whether they do not in fact have a soft spot for the North and want to give them all sorts of concessions so that the North might behave better. But if you look at what the leadership in the Minju Party and the Lee Jae-myung administration actually say, there's some real grounds for concern as to how serious they are about a serious defense against North Korea. But that's tempered by the fact that most South Koreans don't want anything much to do with North Korea or to be like North Korea, which some members of the Lee Jae-myung administration actually would like to be. So this is all complicated very much by South Korea's domestic political situation, where some would say that a hardcore group of radicals have taken control and see China and North Korea as the better option, and are not so interested in a strong relationship with the United States. And if they're not interested in a strong relationship with the United States, then they're not interested in one with Japan. So time will tell just how serious the South Korean administration is.
And I want to pick up on that China-North Korea alignment, where we are seeing these countries, both of them tightening their political alignment. So how does that shape the urgency for closer security cooperation here?
Well, theoretically, you would think it would really just be this huge impetus to get the South Koreans and the Japanese to cooperate, regardless of any differences that they have, and regardless of whether the Americans are there to pressure them. You'd think, but it's not at all clear exactly how I would say pro-democracy, pro-freedom this current South Korean administration is. It does provide, say, an impetus, and you're seeing the Japanese and the South Koreans doing more joint exercises with the Americans around than they've ever done, and they do have meetings like the one we've seen, and the defense groups of the militaries on both sides, they've always gotten along very well. So North Korea is there, but it is not uniformly taken as the threat that one might think it is. And as I said, domestic politics and the stance and the political leanings and alignments of the current leaders of South Korea, that does, indicate and lead to a softening in dealings with both China and North Korea. Now, the South Koreans have just now, as we speak, are allowing visa-free access of Chinese into South Korea. This has never been done before, and it's certainly a concession. And I think it is a sign of just how the Lee Jae-myung administration actually views the People's Republic of China. So the effect of the North Korea-China relationship and the strength of it isn't felt uniformly in South Korea. In Japan, they're very worried about North Korea, however.
Also, Grant, economic ties in the spotlight. South Korea signaling interest in joining the Japan-led CPTPP. How transformative do you think could Seoul's entry be for the pact and for bilateral ties?
Oh, that would be big. The two countries have had strong economic ties for a long time, so it's not new territory, but anything that strengthens the relationships, and particularly in recent times, there have been some hiccups where the Japanese have sort of put some restrictions on South Korea, but that's as a reaction to South Korean sort of political and sort of psychological pressure on the Japanese, calling them war criminals, et cetera, et cetera. But that relationship has always been a strong one economically, and that does tend to have a stabilizing effect and strengthen the basic relationship. It doesn't settle the matter, but nonetheless, it would be an important step to see progress along these lines.
It's been great talking to you. Thanks so much for sharing your insights with us. Grant Newsham from Tokyo, Senior Research Fellow at the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies. Now, North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister has vowed that the country will never give up its nuclear program at the UN General Assembly. It was the first time since 2018 that Pyongyang had sent an official to the summit.
여선반도 평화를 영원 불멸한 곳으로 만들기 위하여 우리는 헌법의 핵을 절대로 다칠 수도 변화시킬 수도 없는 신성하고 절대적인 곳으로 거착시켰습니다. 우리에게 비핵화를 하라는 것은 곧 주권을 포기하고 생존권을 포기하며 헌법을 어기라는 것이나 마찬가지입니다. 우리는 절대로
The North Korean diplomat added that the country's nuclear arsenal is crucial to maintain the balance of power on the peninsula. He again criticized the recent U.S.-led military exercises with South Korea and Japan. North Korea currently faces several UN sanctions for its banned weapons program since conducting its first nuclear test in 2006. South Korean spy agencies have said that the North operates multiple uranium enrichment facilities. And in recent years, Pyongyang has been shoring up support from Russia and China. They argue that sanctions should be eased on humanitarian grounds. Leaders of the three countries met earlier this month at Beijing's military parade, pledging mutual support for each other. Top Chinese and North Korean diplomats also held talks in Beijing this week, fueling speculations of a high-level meeting. Reports say Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected to visit North Korea to mark the 80th anniversary of the ruling Workers' Party next month. Coming up on East Asia tonight, China says it supports all efforts for de-escalation in Gaza after Donald Trump announced a new peace plan that has the Israeli Prime Minister's backing. World leaders are praising U.S. President Donald Trump's 20-point peace plan to end the war in Gaza. The proposal has received the support of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and is awaiting Hamas' response before taking effect. Here in East Asia, China says that it supports all efforts that could ease tensions between Palestine and Israel. The Palestinian Authority has also said it welcomes President Trump's determined efforts to end the war. European leaders are also expressing support. The Commission's President Ursula von der Leyen says the EU stands ready to contribute. And British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says that he strongly supports efforts to end the fighting and release the hostages. French President Emmanuel Macron took to social media to express optimism. He also called on Hamas to accept the peace plan. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said that the deal leaves the door open for a two-state solution. Last month, Australia joined Britain and France to formally recognise a Palestinian state, a move Israel rejects. Meantime, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Indonesia and Pakistan welcomed what they called Mr. Trump's sincere efforts to end the war. Countries also vowed to engage constructively towards finalizing an agreement. Well, under the proposal, a ceasefire will take effect once both sides have agreed to the deal. And within 72 hours, Hamas will release all 20 living Israeli hostages in exchange for 1,700 Palestinian detainees. The withdrawal of Israeli troops from the enclave will also be contingent on Hamas disarmament. Now, a transitional government will then be formed, supervised by the Trump-led Board of Peace Committee. The exclusion of Hamas from governance has become a point of contention, with observers saying the proposal could end up serving only American and Israeli interests. Intense backlash also coming from within Mr. Netanyahu's government, the Israeli far-right finance minister calling it a resounding diplomatic failure. President Trump's Gaza peace plan has reignited discussions about his chances of being nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, something the U.S. leader has stressed that he deserves to win. Here's a closer look at how the award is decided.
The Peace Prize.
The 2025 Nobel Peace Prize will be announced on October 10th. Out of the 338 nominees, only one laureate or organization will be awarded the prize. The winner receives a medal, a diploma, and 11 million Swedish crowns, which is about $1.19 million, along with instant global attention. The Nobel Prize is awarded to individuals, groups, and institutions whose recent work meaningfully advances peace. The winner needs to fit the description in the 1895 will of Swedish industrialist Alfred Nobel.
It's for those who have done the most for fraternity between nations, disarmament or abolition of standing armies, or the holding of peace congresses. That was what he wrote in his will.
The prize is awarded by the Norwegian Nobel Committee, which is made up of 5 members, appointed by Norway's parliament and put forward by political parties.
They will look at the world, see what is happening, what are the global trends, what are the main concerns, what are the most promising processes that we see. And processes here can mean anything from a specific peace process to a new type of international agreement that is under development or that has recently been adopted.
Thousands of people can propose names. This includes members of governments and parliaments, heads of state, university professors, and former Nobel Peace Prize laureates. Although the full list of nominees is locked away for 50 years, some nominators choose to disclose their selections. This year, the leaders of Cambodia, Israel, and Pakistan have said they nominated US President Donald Trump.
You should be able to get the Nobel.
So could Trump actually win it? Those nominations were made months after the January 31st deadline, so are not valid for the 2025 prize. Regardless, some Nobel experts believe Trump is currently dismantling the international world order. Instead, the committee might focus on humanitarian organizations, journalists, or United Nations institutions.
Well, the Israel-Hamas war has been grinding for nearly 2 years now. With the war zone out of bounds for foreign news teams, much of what we know comes from local journalists. But the job is risky, even deadly. The UN says some 250 journalists have been killed in Gaza, more than in any other conflict in history. Now, Blake Sifton files this report for CNA.
As Israeli drones buzz overhead, a grieving father in Gaza stands over the grave of his daughter, Maryam Abu Daka. She was also a mother, a sister, an aunt, and one of 5 journalists killed last August in an Israeli strike.
دخلت الصحافة وهذه ومدامنا حبيبة دمها
33-year-old Maryam worked as a freelancer for the Associated Press. On August 25th, she and other journalists rushed to the site of an Israeli strike on a hospital in Khan Yunis. Reuters contractor Hussam El-Masri was operating a camera position there. He was killed on the spot. Journalists joined rescue workers at the scene. Then Israeli forces struck again. In all, 22 people were killed. The attack drew international condemnation. The Israeli military said it believed the camera was being used by Hamas to observe troops, and it denied intentionally striking journalists.
We are aware of reports that harm was caused to civilians, including journalists. I would like to be clear from the start. The IDF does not intentionally target civilians.
The risk of reporting from Gaza has always been there, but Miriam was determined.
الجامعة وخلصت وبعدين أجت قالت لي يابا أنا حاببة الصحافة. قلت لها مع الصحافة أنت عارف متعب وإرهاق مش بالسهل يعني. قالت لي خلاص يابا أخذت قرار وأنا برضو أولا وأخيرا إذا حبيت تقول لي ما حبيتش أنا بتراجع. قلت لها لا يابا ما زال هويتك توكل على الله.
A study by Brown University in the U.S. found that more journalists have been killed in the war in Gaza than both world wars, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the wars in Yugoslavia, and the war in Afghanistan combined. All the press covering the war from Gaza are Palestinian, as Israel has banned international news agencies from entering the Strip. The Foreign Press Association in Israel says Israel must stop killing journalists in Gaza and give the foreign press free and independent access to the territory.
I'm here in Tel Aviv. Gaza is only 60 kilometers down the coast in that direction. Like many foreign correspondents barred from entering the Strip, I cover the war from here or Jerusalem with footage and interviews from Gaza provided by colleagues there.
They have been the eyes and ears for the world in a conflict where they too have increasingly made headlines. Marwan El Ghul is from Gaza City. He is a producer with U.S. broadcaster CBS News. He now lives and works in Deir el-Bala in central Gaza after being displaced multiple times by the war.
نحن بشر نحن نمارس تغطية الواقع تغطية الحقيقة نحن ناس مدنيين لا نملك سلاحا سوى الكاميرا والقلم هل نقابل بهذا القصف العشوائي المميت للصحفيين؟
It's a double-edged sword, covering the conflict and trying to survive it.
تفكر بسلامتك أم بتوفير الطعام والغذاء إن توفر لأطفالك ولأسرتك؟ أو هل تجد السولار والفيول الكافي حتى تتنقل بسيارتك؟
And there's the psychological toll of bearing witness to pain and tragedy.
كل يوم أذهب إلى المستشفى لتصوير الحرب أجد أطفال مقطعة، أطفال ممزقة، نساء، حوامل. ترك في نفسي أثراً عميقاً جداً لدرجة أني كنت أبكي أحياناً. لا أستطيع تحمل جثث الأطفال متفحمة، محترقة.
It's a price civilians and journalists and parents such as Riyadh say they shouldn't have to pay.
أولاً وأخيراً الهدف اللي صار هذا مش لازم يصير. لأنه كلهم ممرضين، دكاترة، عيانين، مسعفين، فما فيش مبرر إنهم يقصفوا المستشفى. وصحفية هذول بأدوا واجبهم الصحفيين. مين بدي إذا هم بدهم يوصلوا الرسائل مين بدي يوصل؟
As the Israel-Hamas war lurches toward its second anniversary, Gaza remains shut off to outsiders. Journalists who continue to work in the Palestinian enclave know they will continue to face risks as they balance covering the story with trying to protect their lives. For CNA, I'm Blake Sifton in Tel Aviv.
And on that note, we wrap up East Asia Tonight this Tuesday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And you can always find us on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.